Okay. All right, guys. Hey, students. I'm going to do this one inside of a big Toyota Prado. So it might be a little dark, but there's way too much noise in the house. And Timmy keeps watching cartoons. And also the fact that I have, we're three brothers, my older brother, David, and Daniel. And so with the context of the book, the population police could be out and about, but they'll never find me inside of the Toyota Prado. It's not my Prado. I'm just taking care of it. So anyway, the sound should be good. The video might be dark, but I'm going to do chapter 11, 12, 13, so let's go. Chapter 11. Luke watched the Sports family constantly after that. Before, he had just looked out the back vents in the early morning and the late afternoon, when he knew people were about, but he'd seen the face at 2 o'clock, and maybe the other kids knew the rhythms of the neighborhood too, and let his guard down only during times he considered safe. So remember, he saw someone else in there, so he thinks there's another shadow child in there. And so he's up in the attic, he's looking, he's kind of spying on all the neighbors, and he's kind of taking things into account. For 3 long days, Luke saw nothing. Then on the 4th day he was rewarded. One panel of one of the blinds in an upstairs window flipped quickly up and down at 11 o'clock. The 7th day the blinds in a downstairs window were left up in the morning. Luke saw a light go on and off at 9:07, 2 full hours after the last of the Sports family had left. A half hour later the Sports family mother drove in her red car and stomped into the house. 2 minutes later, the blind in the downstairs window went down. The mother left immediately. The 13th day was unseasonably warm, and Luke sweated in his attic. Some of the Sports family's windows were left open, though still covered by the blinds, and the wind blew the blinds back a couple of times. Luke saw lights on in some of the time in other rooms as the day wore on. Once he even thought he saw a glow of a TV screen. He had no doubts anymore. Someone was hiding in the Sports family house. The question was, what could he do about it? Now let's think, what would you do if you're Luke? You're a shadow child, but there's another shadow child living next door. What would you do? I always go with my first thought. My first thought is I have to make contact. I don't turn them in. I'm not a traitor. In Russian we say, "Вообще не предательство, нельзя предать твой друг." You can't turn in your friend. You don't snitch. You don't tattle. You don't turn people in. Deal with stuff yourself. So I stay away from the authorities. No police, no population police. This is me. I would go next door during an auspicious time and I would try to find out, who's there. Try to work something out. Make friends. That's my first thought. Okay. Let's go to chapter 12. Harvest came, and Matthew and Mark stayed out of school to help Dad bring the crops in, 3 of them working some days from dawn until midnight. Mother's factory got busier too, and she began working 2 or 3 hours of overtime every day. She brought up a store of food to Luke's room so he wouldn't get hungry while they were all away. "There," she said cheerfully, lining up the boxes of crackers and bags of fruit. "This way, you won't even miss us." Her eyes begged him not to complain. "Uh-huh," he said, trying to sound game. I'll be fine." He watched the Sports family house only sporadically now. What other proof did he need? What good did it do to him to know about the other 3rd child? What did he expect? That the other kid would run out of his backyard and yell, "Hey, Luke, come out, let's play." He munched his solitary apples. He ate his crackers alone, and in spite of himself, a crazy idea grew in his mind, sprouting new details daily. What if he sneaked into the Sports family house and met the other 3rd child? He could do it. It was possible, theoretically. He spent entire days plotting his route. He'd be hidden by bushes in the barn, through much of his yard, and it was only about 6 feet from there to the nearest tree in the Sports family's backyard. He could crawl on his stomach. Then he'd be hidden by the fence the Sports family shared with the bird brain family, and all of those bird houses might actually help. After that, it was only 3 steps to the sports family house, and they had a sliding glass door at the back, and on warm days, they'd been leaving it open with just a screen, and he could go in there. Would he dare? Of course he wouldn't, but still. The first time he looked out the vents and saw maple leaves shot through with shades of red and yellow, he panicked, and he needed those leaves to hide him on his way to the sports family house. If he waited too long, the leaves would be gone. He began waking up in a cold sweat every morning, thinking, maybe today, do I dare? Just thinking about it made his stomach feel funny, and it rained 3 days in a row in early October, and he was almost relieved because that meant he couldn't go on those days and didn't even have to think about going, and he couldn't risk leaving footprints in the mud. And Dad and Matthew and Mark were in the way, hanging around the house and the barn, grumbling because they couldn't get into the fields. Finally, the rain stopped, the fields dried up, and Dad and Matthew and Mark went back to their combine and tractors and acres away from the house. The backyard and the sports family's backyard were dry too, and it was warm again, and the sports family left their sliding glass door open, and the rain hadn't knocked all the leaves off the backyard trees, but the next rain probably would. On the 3rd morning after the rain, Luke's stomach churned as he sat on his perch, watching the neighborhood empty out. He knew without question that today was the day he'd have to go. But if he ever intended to, he couldn't wait until spring, and he wouldn't be able to stand it. He watched 28 people leave in 8 cars and 1 school bus, hands trembling. He made scratches on the wall again and recounted once, twice, 3 times. 28, yes. 28, yes. 28. The magic number. He could hear the blood pounding in his ears, and he moved in a daze, an office perch, down the stairs, into the kitchen, and then out the back door. So there's just way too much suspense to stop now. And I'm being honest with you, I have not read the next chapter. I'm reading this book as you're reading this book, so you won't get any spoilers, just guesses. Yeah, he's very patient. I would have gone way before this, and I'm kind of a little bit reckless, so, I really wouldn't care if someone catches me, But he's being very careful. He's thinking all of this out. He's very meticulous. Chapter 13, this will be the last chapter, very short. He had forgotten what fresh air felt like, filling his nostrils and lungs. It felt good. With his back pressed against the house, he stood still for a moment, just breathing, and all the months he'd spent inside suddenly seemed like a dream. He'd been like some confused animal hibernating during the nice weather. The last real thing that had happened to him was being called inside when the woods were coming down, when real life was outdoors. So was the danger, and the longer he stayed out, the greater the danger. He forced himself down into a crouch and half-crawled, half ran alongside the house and the hedges and the barn. At the back edge of the barn, he hesitated, staring into the seemingly endless gulf between the barn and the trees at the boundary between his backyard and the sports families. Everyone's gone, he told himself. There's not a soul around to see you. Still he waited, staring at the blades of grass just beyond his feet. He'd been taught all his life to fear open spaces like the one in front of him. It faced dozens of windows, and he'd never stepped foot in any place that public, even if it was deserted. But still hidden by the barn, he made himself inch his foot forward. Then he drew it back. He turned around and looked at his family's house, so safe and secure. His sanctuary. A sanctuary is like a safe place. He heard his mother's voice in his head. "Luke, inside, now!" And it seemed so real, he remembered, and something he'd read in one of the old books in the attic about telepathy, like Charles Wallace. Supposedly, if people really loved you, they could call out to you from miles away if you were in danger. So he should go back. He felt safe there. He took a deep breath, looking forward toward the sports family's house and then back again toward his own, and he thought about returning home. Trudging up the worn stairs, going back to his familiar room and the walls he stared at every day. Suddenly he hated his house. It wasn't a sanctuary, but it was a prison. Before he had time to think again, he pushed himself off into a sprint, recklessly streaking across the grass. He didn't even stop to hide at any trees. He ran right to the sports family's door and tugged at the screen. It was locked. Whoa. So he's trying to break into the house. And if he breaks in, he wants to find out who's there. And we don't know who's there. So chapter 13 stops at pretty incredible suspense. So yeah, thanks for listening. I'm inside of a locked Toyota Prado. I'm kind of sweating now. There's no air in here. There's no circulation. All the windows are down. But it's a quiet place, and if the video turns out good, maybe I'll do more videos in here. It's too loud in the house. Timothy keeps watching cartoons. It doesn't stop. Thanks, guys.